On the last episode of Hops Gnarly Brewing, I found out what happens when you treat ale yeast and lager yeast the same. It wasn't exactly a novel discovery, but I learned that sometimes it's easier to select a yeast that fits your fermentation conditions than it is to control your fermentation conditions to fit your yeast. This week, I'm making my first attempt at a Midwest fruit tart. If you've never heard of this style, or you think of it as something else like a fruited quick sour or smoothie sour, I don't blame you. At this point, it's really only made by a handful of breweries, and most, if not all of them, are located in the Midwest. The defining characteristics are huge fruit flavor, balanced acidity, supportive malt character, and pretty high levels of alcohol. You basically want it to taste just like the fruit that was used to make it. Urban Artifact in Cincinnati, Ohio is at the forefront of defining this new style and has been making cult-worthy beers since 2015. Just Google Midwest Fruit Tart and you'll see pages and pages of links back to Urban Artifact. After reading the style guidelines listed on their website, I sent them an email, and to my surprise, I got a response back from Brett Coleman Baker, Chief of Brewing Operations at Urban Artifact. He sent all kinds of helpful information, best practices, and even a flowchart of the process to help me nail this style, and I can't wait to give it a shot. Now, let's make some beer. For this beer, I'm starting with some local spring water, but something isn't right here. As soon as I poured the water in, I noticed it started leaking from the bottom seam of my anvil foundry. I really have no idea where it could be coming from. The only thing I can think is that maybe there's an O-ring in there that needs to be replaced. Well, I guess I'll switch over to another machine and figure that out later. Now that we're back on track, I'm adjusting the water profile using gypsum, calcium chloride, and Epsom salt. This step isn't necessarily required to make good beer, but it definitely helps, especially if you want to make something great. For the grain bill, Brett from Urban Artifact mentioned that over time, things have slowly simplified. At this point, a lot of their beers only contain 1 or 2 malts. So I'm keeping this one super simple. 75% of the grist is pale 2-row, and the rest is Vienna. After adding fruit into the mix, I'm hoping for around 7% ABV. Let's get it going. I'll keep mashing this in until everything is nice and saturated, and then I'll start a 1-hour timer. In the meantime, I need to calibrate my pH meter for later in the process. One of the defining characteristics of this style is balanced and clean lactic acidity. As the brewer, that means you should know the pH of the beer from start to finish, and in order to do that, you'll need an accurate pH meter. pH strips can get you close, but in my opinion, not close enough. If you're in the market, check out this one on Amazon. It's a little more expensive than some of the other options, but it's been super reliable. After just a few steps, it's calibrated and ready to test the mash pH. It looks like it's just a couple points higher than my target of 5.3, so I'm going to make a slight adjustment using some lactic acid. We've been mashing this thing for an hour now. Time to yank these grains and move on to the next step. With the basket up and out of the wort, I'm cranking this thing to 180 Fahrenheit or about 82 Celsius for pasteurization. Now that we're up to temperature, I'll start recirculating through my plate chiller to sanitize it. 15 minutes to go. Another thing Brett recommended was to make sure I was treating the yeast well, and he stressed the fact that I should be adding a couple specific nutrients. The first one is zinc, so I grabbed some White Labs Servomyces, which is zinc enriched. I'll add one of these now, another after acidification, and another when I add fruit to the fermenter. The second is manganese, which he said is basically crack for lactobacillus. For him, a typical dose rate would be about half a gram per 10 hectoliters, so I'm gonna add a tiny amount. There, hopefully that's not too much. Now, let's chill this thing down and get ready for acidification. We're down to 85 Fahrenheit or about 29 Celsius, we need to pre-acidify the wort to make a safe environment for lactobacillus to do its work. That means dropping the pH to 4.5 using lactic or phosphoric acid. I'll just add a couple milliliters at a time and keep checking the pH until we're there. Sweet, that looks pretty good. Now, I'll snag a little wort for a yeast starter and transfer the rest into the fermenter. My local homebrew store only had recently expired lactose, so they gave me 2 vials for the price of 1, and I think this should work just fine. I've got my fermentation chamber set to 85 Fahrenheit or 29 Celsius, and now that everything is all sealed up, I'll let it hang out for a couple days until we reach Brett's recommended pH of 3.4. It's been a few days and that lacto must not have been too expired because I overshot the pH by a couple points. It'd probably be fine to move forward with this, but instead, I'm making some more wort to add into the mix and hopefully that will balance things out. Plus, it'll give me more beer to enjoy in the end. Cool, 3.4. Now, let's crank this thing to full blast and get our boil started. We're up to a full boil and it's time for the first and only hop addition. Here's 10 grams of Hallertau Blanc, which should bring us to about 13 IBUs. I'll keep an eye on this for the next hour and then I'll add some more yeast nutrient, chill it down, add some pure oxygen, and transfer to the fermenter. The wort that I used to make this starter was already at a pH of 4.5, but then I dropped it down to 3.4 before adding and growing the yeast. This helps to make sure that they're ready to take on the challenge of fermenting this wonderfully acidic beer. For this one, I'm using Imperial Kaiser at a fermentation temperature of 65 Fahrenheit or 18 Celsius. The next day, fermentation was underway and it was in full swing by that night. On day 3, it seemed like things were slowing down, so based on Brett's recommendation, I decided it was time to add some fruit. I couldn't get a good quality puree fast enough, so I decided to use fresh fruit. Looking back, I maybe should have used frozen fruit here, but I'll save those thoughts for the tasting. I have about 36 ounces each of blackberries and raspberries, and after a quick spin in the Vitamix, I'm adding it directly to the fermenter. And like I mentioned before, I'm also adding another dose of Cervomyces with the fruit. At the end of fermentation, I bumped the temperature up a few degrees and took a little sample from the fermenter. I'm super glad I did because it seemed like the fruit wasn't fully incorporated into the beer. After thinking about it for a few minutes, I decided I could shoot some CO2 in from the bottom to try to mix things together. That seemed to do the trick, so I left it alone for a couple more days before cold crashing, transferring, and carbonating. I had so much fun making this one that I'm almost sad we're at the end, but hey, now I get to drink it. The color is an insane fuchsia or bright red, and it has a very light pink head. The aroma is lacking that punch of fruit from the example we checked out. It smells acidic, but I need to find a way to get more fruit into the nose. The flavor has more fruit going on, it's super crisp and dry, and I could crush these all day. That said, I think I need to bring that example back in. This one is made with just raspberries, and it's much darker than mine, which contains blackberries. Where the hell did those blackberries go? This is where I think maybe frozen fruit could have been better because it's frozen when it's perfectly ripe, whereas fresh fruit is picked prematurely before making the journey to your grocery store. I also wonder if puree is the way to go because the Urban Artifact example has a thicker, kind of velvety mouthfeel and a robust fruit aroma. Also, I just noticed that it has vanilla in it. Let's try a little experiment. That's interesting. I added a tiny amount of vanilla extract and somehow it feels different now. The aroma is slightly improved and the body seems totally different. A lot of times, vanilla can shift your perception of things just enough without introducing totally new flavors. It seems thicker and fruitier without tasting like lactose or vanilla. Overall, I'm really happy with this first attempt and I can't wait to brew another. This episode of Hops Gnarly Brewing was made possible by these awesome partners. If you like this video, let me know in the comments and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon. By the way, I reached out to Anvil and they said the problem I ran into with the foundry is super common and it happens when the ball valve is a little loose. Instead of running down the outside of the kettle, it finds its way in between the layers of the kettle and drips out the bottom seam. After tightening the valve, it was leak-free and ready to go.